My name is Reid Schlegel. I'm an industrial designer, and today we're going to talk about my marker rendering techniques. Once you have all of your marker down and you have your actual highlights and you have a lot of the contrast and the value added to your sketch, I always like to go back and clean things up. Something we started in the beginning of the sketch with is composition. We used our light marker to actually lay out where things are going to go loosely, and we tightened it up into our final drawing. The same thing goes for the actual details, callouts, names, zoom-in views, anything you need to add the extra bits of color to actually explain what this drawing is supposed to do. So once your drawing is done, I like to always go in and take my marker or a black pen and pick a little box, put the name, put the callouts, basically explaining little details I think people need to know, and put them into the areas that are negative space, because these are the things you can use to now visually balance out the whole page. Your drawing needs to be what it needs to be to actually explain itself, so you shouldn't manipulate the drawing too much to actually accommodate page composition. But what you can do is then go in with these things, such as callouts and additional views and the name of the sketch or your signature, and actually fill those areas in to then make the whole page feel nice and balanced and clean. This is one extra step I think people don't think about. People just put lines down on pages and make these drawings, which by themselves are beautiful, but when you see it on the page, it doesn't feel very balanced. And it's one of those things that once you get really good at this, you'll know how to make them look very clean, and having a nice composition will just up the level of all your sketches. And something else I like to do that also balances out the page is adding scenery. Adding scenery to the page doesn't need to be something that takes a very long amount of time. It's something that's going to set context for what you're actually drawing and kind of explains where it is, but it's also a way for you to actually clean up the actual composition of the page as well. Say you have a corner which is very empty and you want to fill it in. Make some grass that comes forward in that corner and now fills out the page in a much more visually appealing way. This is something that you can do after the fact by using paint markers. Paint markers are great because unlike regular markers, they're opaque. So if you're drawing grass last, now when you draw each wispy little line to show a piece of grass, it covers up the sketch underneath it. Since the sketch is now covered up, it implies that this is in the foreground and it's actually covering up what you drew beforehand and gives it one extra level of reality. So remember, scenery is something you can use for your actual composition, also setting the context where your drawing or object is, and it also helps to reinforce exactly what is in the foreground and the background. Another detail I always like to do last is adding reflections on glass. Reflections on glass are actually very easy, and it's something that really clearly makes glass come across as the material you want it to be. So after I've drawn a building, I then go in last and take either a ruler or a ship curve and just put a really hard white line over the surface that is supposed to be glass or clear plastic. What this does is it implies that there is a hard light source hitting that object, and what it does also is it starts to blur out the objects behind it, which makes it look much more as if it was glass in reality. Glass is always going to pick up reflections in front of it, which are going to distort what you see. Doing this technique is not exactly how it would look in real life. Whenever I use a very hard line, it kind of implies that I'm using a box light, kind of in a photo setup, which is something you're not really going to see in real life. In real life, it'd be picking up the sky and the clouds and the sun, and it'd be some type of interesting interpretation of what the environment looks like. But doing an actual reflection like this takes a large amount of time. So if you want to, feel free to do it. But if you want the quick way to do it, just take your ruler, do a really quick hard line with your white colored pencil, and then pull the ruler away with the side of your pencil closest to the line, push really hard, and then lighten up your pressure as you move out to make a nice gradient. And this implies that now there is a glass panel there and it is not just a hole looking inside of your building. The last thing everyone needs to do for their sketch is sign it. Coming up with your own unique signature is something that's pretty important for a designer. It's something that is the last little bit that always ties your work together. So put that in a place that kind of fills out the page and balances it out very similarly to the other things we just discussed, and have it on every one of your sketches. Hey everyone, click below to see the full version of this sketch and get all the details.